which are the assumptions for looking at microfinance as a development and poverty reduction promoter? And also let us begin with your own question of your last book. Why finance does not work for...
Why microfinance doesn't work? Yes. Okay. There are many reasons. First of all, most microfinance is used for consumption spending, which might have some positive aspects to it, but that's not really what the original idea was about. Microfinance was about development. Second, most microfinance involves microenterprises by definition, and in most communities in developing countries you find that there is an oversupply already of microenterprises. In most communities you don't have trouble finding somebody selling tomatoes. There are many hundreds of people selling tomatoes on the streets. So adding another 5 people with the help of microfinance doesn't actually create any new income for them. It basically takes income from the existing providers of tomatoes. So basically the idea that cramming more and more people into the same space will lead to somehow incomes being raised or employment created, there isn't really any evidence for that. There is also another problem when you cram so many people into the same space, is that micro enterprises have a very high failure rate. And when a micro enterprise fails, but you still have to repay the microloan, what you have to do is ask your parents for money, or your cousins. You have to go into your savings. Maybe you have to sell something to repay the microloan. So in actual fact, a very large number of people who go into microfinance, set up a micro enterprise, and then a year later fail, end up poorer than they were before they actually started the whole journey. Now, microfinance researchers don't like to go into that aspect because it's a downside. And a lot of the microfinance institutions and funding agencies don't want to finance research which looks at the downside. They only want to look at where you look at they're called Donna Maria stories, where somebody does well and they can educate their kids and they buy a small car. Those are the Donna Maria stories that the the agencies want from any research, and that's the sort of thing they fund. But that gives a completely distorted view of the power of microfinance, just as if I went to Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas and I shouted around who's doing well, and a few people came over and said, well, I just won $1 million jackpot, $1 million jackpot. Could I then conclude, well, you know, gambling isn't such a bad thing for the poor? Here's the evidence. This person just made $1 million. That must prove that gambling is very good for poverty. We should ship all the poor to Caesar's Palace and they will get over their poverty. It's complete nonsense, but it's a logic that's at the heart of microfinance. Finally, microfinance is very bad because we know what we need to create in the local community if we want to develop and we want to reduce poverty. We need small and medium businesses which are innovative, which have some technology, which trade outside of the local market, which can train their workers. Microfinance actually produces the exact opposite of those types of enterprises. It basically produces informal micro-enterprises. We in the Western richer developed countries, we became rich because we moved our resources out of informal micro-enterprises and into more growth-oriented enterprises. That's how we became rich. That's how in the 1970s the East Asian economies became rich. But yet we come to developing countries and we tell them the exact opposite recipe. Don't try to put your money into the best enterprises, put it through microfinance institutions, which then put it into a woman selling tomatoes on the street. It's a recipe for permanent impoverishment. So I think those are the reasons why I'm against microfinance.
Okay, so which are our possibilities? What is the way to move forward? Is it microfinance still a path, or there are any other possibilities for us, developing countries, to go out from poverty and to improve
I think there are. I've come to Bolivia for the first time, and I'm very impressed with the work of some of the agencies that have been working here. The Bank for Development, Productive Development, the BDP, is doing very interesting work. It doesn't have enough money to do what it's doing, but it's on the right track. It's trying to take the financial resources that Bolivia has and it's trying to put them into the best possible enterprises. That's the way forward. Bolivia, though, has some very big microfinance institutions like Banco Sol and Prodem, which take a lot of the savings of ordinary Bolivians and then put them into the woman selling tomatoes on the side of the street. That's not very good for Bolivia, it's very good for Banco Sol. There has to be a way of addressing this issue, that all this money from savings, somehow Bolivia has to try to recycle that money into more productive avenues, like small businesses which are exporting, medium businesses that are using some technology, small businesses that are producing something that has got a lot of use to other areas, small businesses like cooperatives that are bringing farmers together. That's where Bolivia's resources, including its newly found wealth in oil and gas, needs to go in those areas, and not into financing more and more women to sell tomatoes or arepas on the street. That's really not the way to escape poverty.
And which are the policies for these people, for these women selling tomatoes in the street? Okay, well, we are not going to microfinance their activities, but which policies?
Well, I mean, the way to deal with that is, first of all, to stop creating the problem. So stop creating more women selling tomatoes on the street. But if you look at if surveys show that the people who are working in these informal enterprises actually earn very, very little, just a few dollars a week, and it's back-breaking work. So Bolivia is a poor country, but it's getting a bit richer. So some of that money should go into paying a basic income for those women. And even if you pay them $30 a week, that will allow them to stop sitting on the street for 16 hours a day and do other things within the family or other more productive activities. That would be the first step. To doing that. Then if you're creating jobs in small and medium enterprises with some mechanization and technology and stuff, then you can start to employ those women as employees in those companies. Or ideally, if these small or medium enterprises were cooperatives, you could take these women and say, you were an individual entrepreneur in your business there, but here you'll become a co-entrepreneur. You'll be a member of a cooperative, so you're still an entrepreneur, but you're in a cooperative, and there will be a much greater chance that she will be able to escape poverty working with other people from her own situation. That would be what I would recommend.
Okay.